Hello there guys, what is going on? Son of Chelsea back here again for another edition of Added Time, answering your questions that you kindly submitted for today's episode. But before we get into any of that, I want to ask you guys, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also hit the like button if you're enjoying the content because it helps out the channel as well. Let's get into your questions like we do every Monday. Firstly here from KJ, who asks, would you rather start as Pete as backup left back or Emerson? Now this question may have to be answered by Frank Lampard in the Newcastle game on Saturday because, of course, I'm sure you're referring to Ben Chilwell's injury last night for England, having to come off quite early in the game against Belgium. It appears to be a back-related injury. We don't know the severity of it yet, how long he will be out, if he'll be out at all, whether he'll be able to return for the Newcastle game, which, of course, fingers crossed, we hope so, because he's such a key player for Chelsea. And yeah, it was a concern whenever we have these international breaks and you see a player of your own get injured. Let's just hope he's back at Callum now and he's recovering quickly. But in relation to this question, I can understand maybe, I mean, Marcos Alonso I think is so out of the picture at the moment, and I think it all traces back to that West Brom incident, doesn't it? But Emerson, I could understand from an attacking standpoint of trying to keep that width within the team. But the problem with Emerson I always have is, in a game, and we've seen it already this season, he has one moment, one lapse of concentration in a game, and it costs Chelsea very dearly. I mean, think about the Tottenham League Cup game, him not being in the right place to prevent the equaliser there, and of course Chelsea lost on penalties. That was very late on in the game. You don't see that with Ben Chilwell, and you don't really see that with Dave. Yes, Dave, out of all, he's a very versatile player for Chelsea. We've known this over the years, right back, centre back and left back, even once playing in central midfield. I think he could play at striker if you asked him to, but I think Dave still has that defensive nous and intelligence that, sure, you're going to lose something if we have to play Dave there, but I'd rather Dave there for security rather than Emerson, because I think Emerson will let you down at key moments within a game, and something we've had this season recently is that resilience and intelligence and danger awareness in that back four, and I just don't think Emerson is good enough to give that. So I think Dave absolutely would come in at left back if Chilwell is not available for the Newcastle game on Saturday. At the Bridge Pod asks, after another clean sheet this time for Senegal, is Edouard Mendy showing that he is one of the most underrated goalkeepers in Europe? Underrated I don't think is the right word for Edouard Mendy, to be honest. I think he's burst onto the scene in terms of Chelsea fans' minds and Premier League fans' minds, in terms of arriving at Chelsea, having such a big impression, improving that area so much for us, and of course he's going to get a lot of plaudits. I don't think he's underrated at all. I think you have to see a longer period of time. I don't want to jump two-footed in with Edouard Mendy. He's had a really strong start to life at Chelsea. He almost seems like the perfect signing at the moment. He's adding everything we needed from a goalkeeper after last season. Still a long way to go for Edouard Mendy at Chelsea. We're coming into a really difficult period of the season now, so he's going to be tested a lot more than he has been recently, and then you'll find out a lot more. But it's just great to see, just on an overall point, I think it's great to see him excelling and flourishing at the moment, and it's really helping Chelsea in all facets, definitely defensively. But no, I don't think he's underrated. I think a lot of people rate him. It's going to be interesting to see how he develops at Chelsea, because if we start winning big titles, I think you'll start to see him, grow in sort of the conversation in terms of top keepers in the world. But at the moment, he's doing a great job for Chelsea, and let's hope that continues. Chelsea 1905 asks, would you take Jack Grealish at Chelsea? If anyone's been watching this channel for a while, and I believe I did a video back in the summer about this, about my sort of the players I'd love to see Chelsea sign. So not players that we've been linked with. Jack Grealish, I think, was like number one on that list, I think, or one of the top ones on that list, because I'm such a fan of Jack Grealish. I mean, outside of Chelsea players, Jack Grealish is probably my favourite football player to watch regularly, and we saw it again for England last night. I'm so happy he's finally getting minutes for England. He's a wonderful player to watch, but he's not just, a aesthetically pleasing player to watch, in terms of his technique, in terms of his, guile and flair on the ball. He's such an effective player. Just look at the numbers this season for Aston Villa. He's one of the best attacking players so far this season in the Premier League. He's an effective, dangerous player, and he's just a joy to watch, and I think he deserves it, because I think, staying patient with Aston Villa, going down to the Championship with them and really leading them, and he really drags that team, and it's great to see now with Ross Barkley there and some other brilliant additions they brought in this summer. I think Grealish is finally has good players around him to play with as well, so it's not just all incumbent on Jack Grealish pulling Villa out of bad holes, basically, and sort of dragging him out of terrible situations. He's finally got some creative talent around him to help him and really excel his game too. But absolutely, I think the issue for Jack Grealish, and it's a shame because I'm a massive fan of him, Chelsea have got so many players in his ilk in our squad, you know, Mason Mount, Kai Havertz, we just spent a lot on, you know, you got other players developing like Conor Gallagher. It's difficult, you know, and even Ross Barkley could return, you know, in the summer. So it's always difficult to see, you know, how, you know, signing another creative midfielder. You know, Jack Grealish is a unique talent. He's a brilliant talent, and I think he's only going to get better. And I wouldn't be stunned, you know, if he makes a big move soon, but I don't think it'll be to Chelsea, unfortunately. But I'm such a big fan of Jack Grealish. I always love watching him play football because he's a stunning talent. He really is. Matt H asked, do you think there's a reason Hudson-Odoi rarely gets game time under our managers? I think it's difficult to judge. I think the injury has played a massive part in him not getting as much game time. Several injuries now, but I even saw quotes recently from Hudson-Odoi talking about how that Achilles injury, he's still suffering the effects of it, which when you think about how long ago that was now since he recovered, September 2019 when he returned to first team football, it shows you how serious an injury that is and how much it can set back a player. Because Hudson-Odoi, you talk about the managers, you know, treating him well or the way they treat him, you know, he was in an upward trajectory under Maurizio Sarri. Sarri made him a first team player, and I think Sarri gets a lot of unfair flack. I think it did take a little bit too long for him to break into the team. Of course, got that England call up and he still wasn't a first team player for Sarri. But when he did get that chance, Sarri gave him that chance, and then he was basically a first team player. Then he gets injured and the season ends. Lampard brought him back into the team very quickly after that injury. You know, if you think about the sort of the early months of 1920, he was a big player then, and you felt like, okay, once again, he's going to be a main player. But I think the issue for Hudson-Odoi is not only has he got injured several times during sort of Lampard's time at the club so far as head coach, but also I look at the form of other players, you know, in his position. You know, Christian Pulisic, incredible at points last season. You weren't going to drop him. Willian. I mean, a lot of people forget about Willian in terms of how good he was at points last season, but also in the crucial run into last season. His stats were just incredible, and you were never going to drop Willian with the experience, but also the quality of Willian at the back end of last season. Now you've got Timo Werner playing out wide. Are you going to drop Timo Werner? Kai Havertz, we've invested a lot of money in, who can play out wide. Hakim Ziyech now looks incredible. Are you going to drop Hakim Ziyech? This is the issue of being a player at Chelsea, and I think that it's a tough thing for Lampard. I think Lampard gave him opportunities at the start of the season, and I actually think when Hudson-Odoi has got minutes, I think he's impressed. I think the difficulty is it's how intense the competition is at that end of the pitch. My concern is with Hudson-Odoi, and I could go on for an hour about this. You know, it's such a complex situation for Hudson-Odoi. Thinking about how young he is, he's only just turned 20. If he can wait more at Chelsea and wait for his opportunity, I think he will become a first team player eventually, because I think he's got the quality and mentality to do it. But I just wonder, with Bayern lurking and with all the rumours constantly around his future, will he be here long enough to really get that opportunity? But he's got to take the opportunities when he gets them, and you never know. Fitness, injuries to the likes of Christian Pulisic could open the door for Callum Hudson-Odoi to get more minutes. So I don't really think the managers can be overly criticised by their treatment. I think especially Lampard, I think, has given opportunities to Hudson-Odoi. I think it's just on Hudson-Odoi to take those opportunities and maybe be a bit patient with his career at Stamford Bridge. Byron G asked, does a fully fit Pulisic walk straight back into the starting 11? Probably not if we're, you know, thinking about this game on Saturday against Newcastle. I don't think Frank should change the starting 11. Of course, Ben Chilwell's fitness permitting, of course, but I think, you know, you want to keep that as sort of solid and consistent as possible for Frank, and I think he should be doing that at the moment. You know, the 4-3-3, we pretty much know what the defence is going to look like. We know what the best midfield looks like, at least Cover and Havertz. I've got some questions about that for today's video, and you know, I think that's an issue as well. But mainly there is a consistent now starting 11 we're starting to see with Lampard, which is what we've called for. So I don't think there should be that radical change. I think that with Pulisic, if he is fit, I wouldn't be too stunned if Frank rotates, save for the Champions League game. You've got to remember about this, you know, look at this period, this next, not only next 10 Premier League games, but just the bulk of games now after this international break, because this is the last international break till March. So we get into the serious, you know, bulk of the season now for Chelsea, and there's a lot of midweek games, so there's going to be a lot of time for rotation. So just because a player isn't playing on Saturday, there's more than likely a chance they'll be in the starting 11 a couple days later, and I just think that's the nature of this very congested season. Nathan asked, do you think Ross Barkley will be back considering his form at Aston Villa? Ross Barkley has been incredible so far this season. I'm so happy for Ross. You know, I think he really struggled at Chelsea, and it was great to see actually under Lampard under coaches he played under, which is really, you know, a little bit under Conte, Sarri and Lampard. It seemed like Lampard was the one coach to get the best most, consistent Ross Barkley, but now he's gone up to another level. I just think he's playing with freedom, maybe with less pressure, the spotlight of being a Chelsea player, the intense competition in that midfield area. He very much, I'm sure, feels like a big fish in a small pond in a sense, and it's given him a great lease of life. With the 4-3-3, if the 4-3-3 becomes the main formation for Frank Lampard, undeniably, which I hope it does, then you could see an opportunity open up for Ross Barkley again. I mean, if he's still in the same form come the back end of this season, maybe Chelsea will reconsider it. Also, I mean, maybe they'll look at it as well and think to themselves, we've got other players now, Kai Havertz, Mason Mount, younger players that we're really focusing on. Would Ross then maybe get a permanent move to Aston Villa? Chelsea know they'll be guaranteed a pretty big profit based on what they originally paid for Ross Barkley. I think it's just waiting to see what happens with Ross, because he's in a purple patch at the moment. Will that deteriorate over the season? We'll have to wait and see, because Aston Villa have started the season brilliantly this season. It's been so good for them. And Ross Barkley is a massive part of that. I just always wonder if Ross, has he found his perfect place? At Aston Villa, the expectation was expected of him as an Aston Villa player rather than being a Chelsea player playing Champions League football. I just wonder if it's one of those cases where it's a player that looks good at certain levels or a certain club, but doesn't look as good when under bigger pressure, bigger scrutiny. I wonder if that's the case as well. But I'm happy for Ross Barkley, absolutely, at the moment. And lastly, Kwame asks, how do you respond to all of Liverpool's injuries? Do you think Frank should treat players more cautiously? I think Chelsea and Frank and obviously the medical staff this year, I think have treated players more cautiously than they have previously. Look at the management of Thiago Silva, of N'Golo Kante, of other players too, Christian Pulisic and Hakim Ziyech before they returned. I think there was much care given to that. I think that there is an issue this season, right? And I think it's an unavoidable issue that every single club is facing. I mean, Liverpool, they've been brilliant at keeping their best players fit, but I think it's catching up with them now. The intense nature of Jurgen Klopp's sort of coaching philosophy and style of football, it will catch up with you, and I think maybe it is now. And this season, as I've always stressed, having a big squad is so useful and so valuable more than ever, because it's not only the games we're playing as Chelsea, in terms of that midweek Champions League game in between Premier League games, and sometimes you're travelling long distances, as we saw in that week where we played Man United, Krasnodar and Burnley, but international breaks, and as we've seen this issue with COVID as well, players testing positive, that can rule them out of games as well. It's a really difficult time for coaches, and I think that you want to have that balance, as I'm sure every coach does. If you want to be cautious with players, but when you've got a big game coming up and you've got a player who's maybe on the brink of being fit, do you play him? Do you not play him? Is there that concern if you don't play him and you don't get the right result, you're going to be criticised? It's always that great balancing act. I think that Chelsea, based on last season's injury issues, I think they've clearly taken that on board. So you see a lot more sort of cautious sort of approach to the likes of Silva, maybe Kante as well, and other players too who have injury issues in the past. I think that every club is going to suffer with injuries. I don't think you can avoid them, and I think it's going to be more prevalent than ever this season. And unfortunately, as cautious as a club may be, a player could go away on international duty and get injured, and then that's not Lampard or Chelsea's fault, is it? So it's going to be difficult this year, and I think Liverpool, as has been proven this so far this season, have probably suffered most because of the congested and really intense nature of this season. But that is it for this episode of Added Time. Thank you guys so much for getting the time to watch this video. If you did enjoy it, hit that subscribe button and a notification bell so you never miss an upload. Follow me on Twitter @SonOfChelsea, and I'll see you again.